All right, everybody. In this video, we're going to take a look at the last problem here in this series of homework problems from chapter 9 and 10, and 10.3 is our last problem here. And what this problem is going to ask us to do is to calculate the debt to equity ratio for different companies here that we're going to look at and compare those, and kind of look at what that means, right? So one thing we need to do here when we're doing debt to equity is we need to know what the equity balance is. And so just as kind of a hint, reminder that equity equals assets minus liabilities, right? Kind of basic accounting equation. And so it does, kind of you have to calculate it here, as sort of a first task. Well, that went weird. Just a little glitch there. So that's the first task, is just to figure out what equity is. And then to figure out debt to equity, we can just take our liabilities divided by our equity. So debt to equity, liabilities being debt, essentially. And so then we can just drag our formula across so that each time this drags across, it's taking liabilities divided by equity. And so then you get these amounts. Here's for Walmart, Target, and Sears. And then it asks us, so pretty easy, and then it asks us which company has the greatest proportion of equity financing. And so when we think about what this question is asking, is it's really saying who has the lowest debt to equity ratio. Because when we say equity financing, we're really speaking to the sense of how much of our equity, how much of our capital comes from equity, from earned, revenues and contributions, et cetera, that we've been able to save essentially as a company, right? And so here, the company that has the greatest proportion of equity financing would be Walmart, because it has the lowest out of all three. Alternatively, if the question asks which company has the greatest proportion of debt financing, then you would look and say, okay, that's Target. Target has the most amount of debt to equity, at the highest debt to equity ratio, essentially. And typically speaking, you want to have as low debt as possible, generally. Keep your interest expense down, all that kind of stuff, whether it's for you personally or from a business perspective. There's different strategic reasons to use debt, not that it's something that should never be used, in a business context or in a personal context as well. But in general, you would like to have a higher level of equity. And the higher your debt to equity ratio gets, and the more debt financing that the company is using, it just puts that company in a position where they're more and more they call it highly leveraged, or, saddled with debt payments, that they're going to have to make payments on that debt. So it just kind of makes the company less resilient to issues that could arise in the future, even if, they're able to make their payments fine at this point. So okay, cool. Well, that's pretty much it for this problem. Relatively basic, just to kind of have a general understanding of the fact that this debt to equity ratio, to know what that is. And there's a few other ratios we looked at in the exercise portion, that with the red X's that go away. So things like the gross margin ratio, times interest earned ratio, that's a good one. All those different kind of metrics are pretty interesting. So all right, well, thanks everybody. Appreciate you following along in this series of videos for chapter 9 and 10. And I will see you in class or in another video here. So take care. Hope you all have a good day or night or whatever time it is when you're watching the video.